Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 4, 2026. This is Mindprint Hash with Matt Dines, as always, and myself, Cameron Otsuka. There's been a lot of movement in the last week or so around Greenland, around EU, and for those who did not know already, the World Economic Forum is currently meeting in Davos. So, whenever you hear Davos man and the elites and all of that, this is what they're referring to. A lot of folks in the Trump administration are currently there speaking. Trump himself spoke, I believe it was yesterday. Um, Scott Bessent as well, Howard Lutnick, and then obviously EU leaders across the board. And I think Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you here to kind of intro Christine Lagarde here. We're going to put up a video in a second, but maybe just describe what the video is before we turn to that for the viewers here.
Yep. So Cameron, good setup. Davos itself, just think of it as the biggest ski party in the world or most exclusive ski party in the world for the West elites, right? So you think about this, not so much, Asia, not so much Russia. Like the focus is on the post-World War II Western coalition, um, government officials, business leaders, regulators, etc. They all come. They talk about what they're doing, basically like a big picture conference environment, but the ones, unlike whatever conferences you attend in your industry are, dear viewer, this is for the people in the big club that most of us are not in. So for background here, this year's was a different tone than any other since I've been following this, as I entered, the workforce as like a young adult, probably about the time of like 2008. Different tone here, and you're going to see it and how we cover this going forward. But I think to start it off, one of the clips that set this up, you look at the different leaders amongst the West, you call it the Atlantic Coalition, East Coast of the United States, European old wealth, bureaucrats, etc. You see Christine Lagarde in this video look more flustered and just a full loss of composure, in my opinion, as I'm watching this, than I've ever seen before. Probably the only leader I saw who maintained the sense of composure in their comments or in their speaking appearances was Ursula von der Leyen. Would stand out highly. Nothing really big announced there. But let's just go into it with this clip, Cameron, from Christine Lagarde speaking with CNN International.
This is a wake-up call, a bigger one than we ever had. And I think that Europe is going to look at its strength, look at its weaknesses, do a big SWOT analysis and decide what do we need to do to be strong by ourselves, to be more independent, to rely on the internal trade that we do with each other so that we can just not ignore, but at least be prepared and have a plan B, just in case the normal relationship is not restored. This is a wake.
So again, that was Christine Lagarde delivering her remarks at Davos. So Matt,
I mean, what you heard there, we're going to do a SWOT analysis. We're going to move to our plan B. We're going to examine how to trade within our internal block, within ourselves. And I mean, you just see the rattling, everything coming into this. And I think if you think as an outside observer, well, what got them here, right? Why are they so rattled? What is going on? If you're not following the story closely over the last few years or decade, you see this stuff and it makes no sense to you. But I think what you're seeing under the hood, under the scenes, we'll get into this in a second, but all the big stories we've been covering over the last 12 months or since the November 2024 elections, trade deals, Liberation Day, gold and silver breaking out, old metals and commodity market pricing structures breaking down, failing to work, central banks turning to gold as currency reserves. All of this, all of these death by 1,000 cuts, and these aren't just little cuts; these are like big hits. But I think all of that is culminating to the surface, and what you see here is the old institutionalists, the old guard, who have a primary interest in maintaining the old status quo, coming to the realization that the old framework is basically completely busted, right? We'll get into that, like how did it bust, but um, just to make a fun analogy here to get into the weeds this week. How do I frame this as like a peak millennial, right? In my childhood, and an understanding of the world, and how to make this kind of relatable for everybody else to pick up what's going on. I think what you're seeing this week started off. We called the first slide here, the topic we'll cover, as the Great Schism of the West. This is like the moment of breakage, right? This is the key moment. And yeah, it is pivotal at this point. It's irreversible. It's not going back. You know, Humpty Dumpty's fallen off the wall and can't be put back together. I think what we're looking at was like as big of a moment in terms of the big narrative as, you know, some of these larger breaks amongst, you know, the Western European power base, or, you know, American power base as it became post 1776. You know, and framing this in my childhood, you're looking at like make or break moments, right? And one of the things that stands out, like who is the GOAT, right? You go into the like athletes of all time. It's Michael Jordan, right? The penultimate. And what we just saw at Davos was like one of the, um, I would just call it just routings. Like we literally called it that in one of our second topical summaries. But I think in terms of watching this split, like what the Trump coalition, or the, you know, the Trump administration members came in and did at this kind of Davos dismantling that we just saw, it looks a lot like this 1998 Jordan Bulls, which had like a formative experience on me as a child, realizing like just what it looks like for, you know, two competing factions, you know, out on the basketball court in this case. One of those just to be completely dominant over the other. And at the end of the day, you have uh, no dispute in terms of you know who's ranked where in terms of the hierarchy,
The
right?
score really, I mean, just this is 96 to
Yeah.
54. It's not even close.
Oh yeah. So what I wanted to get at here, remember, we all look back. Everybody who's followed Michael Jordan or the 1990s NBA basketball, you've seen this picture of this, like the last shot, right? And it was on that the Last Dance documentary that captured everybody's attention during the lockdowns, right? Michael Jordan saved us from COVID insanity, you know, for most of us, or many of us, right? But you see this shot, this crossover, Byron Russell, you know, the haters say he pushed off. That's just, you know, a weak
Left hand,
excuse, right?
maybe, yeah.
But anyway, for me watching this, you know, every game of that 1998 NBA Finals, you know, peak NBA in my opinion, this wasn't the when the series was decided, right? This was the final shot, and this was the closeout. And it's the picture everybody puts on their, you know, posters in the in the office, you know, who, you know, are men in my era, aged back at 40s, 50s, etc., who want to remember the good old days. But the actual deciding moment of this series wasn't Game 6, that final shot. It was Game 3 when we go in there. And, you know, for people who watch The Last Dance, right, it was a back and forth between this Utah Jazz team, Karl Malone, John Stockton, who wanted to challenge the great, you know, power or force of nature that Michael Jordan was. And you had other, you know, all-time Hall of Famers on that team, Scottie Pippen, no disregard, Tony Kukoc, etc. But it's a Michael Jordan story, right? You get in game 1 and 2, it's back and forth. Bulls are on the road, but the series was won in game 3. And in that game, Cameron, you were talking about this. The Bulls come out and just completely dismantle the Utah Jazz and end up winning 96 to 54. And I can't get across like how dominant of just a complete shellacking this was by Michael Jordan on what's supposed to be one of his signature opponents. This 54 points that they held the Utah Jazz to, which was supposed to be also kind of an all-time team or a challenger team, never got over that hump, so they can't be by definition, in my opinion. 54 points at that in that game represented the lowest team score by an offense in a game, in an NBA game in the shot clock era. And this came in the pivotal swing game in the NBA
Wild.
Finals. So, my opinion, what we just saw at Davos was almost one of those. Like, it was just a complete obliteration. And then you saw it in Christine Lagarde's face. For those of you good at reading posture, body language, etc., like what I see there is just, it's like that coach at halftime who is just completely lost. He's overpowered, all of that. So Europe's going back to plan B. You hear media, Gavin Newsom trying to stir Western leaders in this other clip we didn't show to stand up, stand tall, try to put up some resistance to, what was just accomplished in the last few days, and put the cherry on top at this Davos convention. But that's what we're talking about as an analogy here on what we just witnessed. So let's get into it, make a little sense of that, because I think to a lot of people, it may not yet be clear. The West itself, the post-World War II order of Western liberal democracies, stood together, tied together with like organizations that crossed over the Atlantic, whether it's NATO, IMF, Atlantic Council, etc. You can go down a long list of names. This week at Davos represented like the complete fracturing. There's not a united West anymore. This old kind of governing consensus or power consensus with the Western liberal democracies that collectively interacted and operated as a whole. I'd include, lists off the nations, Eurozone members like EU countries, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, etc., being, a core block, United Kingdom, USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Taiwan. That block is separate. Like they're not operating as a whole anymore. And that's crystal clear. We'll get into that in a second. But that's what we're looking at here. And that's why, for those people who say AI is soulless and can't put together good art, I spun this up. This is I don't know what you call it, satirical photo in the style of the Washington crossing the Delaware that's showcased at the Met Museum in New York. It's an American treasure as a piece of art itself. What we just saw at Davos at this ski trip was reminiscent of that crossing of the Delaware in terms of big picture history, in my opinion. So you get into the setup here. Why do I say that fracture or that coalition, that post-World War II coalition of Western democracies has been fractured? Starting Friday night or Friday evening, after markets closed, weeks wrapped, we started to get the setup going into Davos, right? I'd say two key headlines that came across the blotter. These were in progress late last week, but you had Mark Carney, PM of Canada, and Gavin Newsom, both going, I guess, separately and independently, but also, they're doing the exact same thing. So I would say they're an aligned couple of players behind a Western power faction. They go to mainland China. They meet with Xi Jinping's government. They strike deals, MOUs, etc., largely covering, kind of just rehashing the same key topic points of the last 10 to 20 years that the Western coalition has been putting. What do I mean by that? Climate change, clean tech, travel, tourism, cultural appreciation stuff. But in the big picture, these are not needle movers, in my opinion. And I know that's a subjective statement, but I think given the nature of what we've witnessed for kind of at least a couple of decades at this point, you could say maybe starting with September 11th, but definitely by 2008, it was obvious that those old post World War II, Western rules-based order kind of institutional framework, all of that, those were on their last legs. We were set for some sort of transition, some replacement to whatever order is coming next. Hear that in Mark Carney, or you heard that in Mark Carney's statements he gave, talking about the new world order, that he thought this, yeah, it's in there at the back of the quote. He paused after every word for emphasis. If those key things, those topic points that were hit on in these MOUs between mainland China, CCP, the Xi Jinping version iteration of the CCP, I'll get into that in a second, and the state of California under Gavin Newsom, Canada itself, represented by Mark Carney. If those talking points had the legs and actual momentum behind it for real market adoption, after 20 years of this, there would be more consensus. They would be delivering results. You would see it working. And I think the fact of the matter is none of it is actually working. So from my standpoint, like this, what we just saw at Davos was, potentially, never say never, but I think it was the final attempt to build a kind of a consensus structure around these old ideas that have been propagating since the late 90s, or maybe even before that, but 2000s, 2010s, et cetera. Those days are over, in my opinion.
To
And
your
so what
point,
did you get? Yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
say to your point, Matt, about the clean tech and all of that. If they actually showed results, you'd have more consensus. On the flip, you've got semiconductors, which are clearly useful, usable today, and have been around for more than even the clean tech ideas. And that's exactly what the fight is centered on, right? So I just want to kind of add that in there.
Yeah,
When we talk about what's the comparison of something that it does have consensus, you can see it very
yeah,
clearly.
yeah. So I view this. So think about this in two structures. All right, China, you've got obviously a one China policy, put mainland China, then you've got Taiwan, right? Don't want to make this, I don't want to dive deep into controversy, so we'll just leave it at that. Two separate governments. They were the opposition, in the early days between the nationalists who got, basically ejected out of power at the end of World War II, and the Mao Zedong movement, who basically reestablished domestic control over or domestic governance, and pushed out the foreign influence with the help of um, other foreign powers at the end of, as part of World War II, and also leading into the aftermath of World War II. My point there, you've got what's basically universally recognized as the government of China, the CCP, right? One China views Taiwan, China itself, as the same thing, right? However, most other countries also recognize Taiwan, some sense that they have a government, up in the air. It's just one of those, we call it jump balls. It's never actually been settled, and it's just coming up, springing to the forefront again. My point here, when you see Gavin Newsom is representing the state of California, which is subject to the senior authority of the U.S. federal government, right? Which is from the executive branch, run out of Washington, D.C., the White House, et cetera. My point here, you've got, call it a vassal state, right? Or subjected government to the senior authority in the U.S. You've got Gavin Newsom going to the CCP to work with the senior authority, or what's widely viewed as the senior authority government in China. And then from Canada's perspective, I think a lot of us still view Canada as an independent country. My interpretation, they're actually not. The head of government is still technically the British Crown. There are certain offices there that actually report whether the Crown is directly represented. So in my sense, also, you've got another subject state government represented by Mark Carney visiting the CCP to enter into some deal, right? Build momentum. What I just said was probably controversial. Many people will disagree, but let's just let it go. Take that for what it is. You've got two, let's call them second tier in terms of sovereign authority leaders, ultimate authority leaders from the West, traveling to CCP to lock in some sort of agreement, some sort of ties to build a new power coalition headed into Davos for the big game that was going to take place a few days later, right? So you start from there. All right. Now, on the other side, if you're the senior authority in the US, how do you respond to that? We know what's going on here at this point. It's a story about standing up for nation state level sovereignty at the end of the day, right? Is what this old, like what the Trump movement all boils down to. I think at this point, and also this is just getting into personal opinion at this, with this statement, but I don't think this is just a movement like a single lone man authoritarian type of movement. There is a much deeper bench of leadership here at both political leaders, political talent, business talent, just what have you. This is a much bigger movement behind it than just one figure, which is, I think, what the competing Western power factions are, I would say, missing, but I think they get it at this point. And that's probably highly worrying, or causing
I
them a
think,
lot of
yeah,
worry
just
from
having
their
Carney go out
perspective.
and do this, that's a clear sign, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so how, if you're the other competing Western power faction, which is made up of, just call them the sovereigntists, right? You would include the Trump camp inside the United States. You do have a movement for this. They're in Europe, but they hold no power, right? We're talking, Marine Le Pen's party, AFD, etc. You can even say
Maloney.
Georgia Maloney is one of these, or an example of one of these. They just don't hold any vehicles of power per se, except for you could say Maloney in that case is definitely holding some of the keys to power. But in Northern Europe, I would say would be the caveat. They're not, the institutionalists have not lost any ground at this, or given up any ground to this movement within their little North Sea, Baltic Sea, etc. Sphere. So if you're the counter movement here, represented by Trump, and I would include Taiwan in this as well, also Japan, and we'll get into that in a second, under the Takaichi prime ministership that came through last fall. All right, what do you do if you're Trump? Same time, Trump and Taiwan announced a basically step up deal for the onshoring of semiconductor supply chains. We talked about TSMC Arizona, that chips fabrication development that has been underway for multiple years now. It's now producing live chips. We saw a step up in that the prior relationship with a new deal announced. So TSMC, part of the bullets here, TSMC announced it's going to expand its just fabrication centers or facilities within Arizona. I think, Cameron, I don't have the exact number here, but I think they said they're going to up it to 5. So we're going to have 5 chip fabs in Arizona.
Yep.
I saw another headline. This is just on technological prowess and achievement of those centers, but I believe they announced, a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, that the first 2 nanometer chips had been produced from those facilities.
That's
Double
right.
check me on that.
Yep.
But in terms of actual capacity, I know TSM's fabs in Taiwan itself are kind of known as the state of the art. The kind of the ramp up of the curve of capabilities within Arizona, it's showing demonstrated progress and achievement. Secondary, that was not a part of these deals that started coming out in the news in the past week. You also saw $250 billion of credit guarantees from TSM, HQ in Taiwan for these, facilities. So that's helping out the banks, helping out the U.S. Capital base to actually fund the infrastructure build out. And then you saw another $250 billion in investment from Taiwan capital itself committed to the supply chain, onshoring build out itself. Some other bullets I probably missed there, but that was the counter development to what we saw from the headlines out of Mark Carney, Gavin Newsom, as everybody kind of positioned to go into the big game that was Davos here. We're just keep going with the sports analogy. All right. And then the last thing there, Sunday morning after the TSM thing, a news item hit, after all the Carney and Newsom handshake photo ops with Xi were done, pushed to X, Instagram, Twitter, etc. Sunday morning, you got the announcement from Takaichi that Japan was going to hold snap elections, right? She just came to power like 3-4 months ago. Remember the golf clubs photo, Shinzo Abe's golf clubs gift to Trump we went over. So what this actually represents. So to come to power, the Japan's LDP, which has basically been the holder of the reins to Japanese political power since World War II, and you know, the negotiated surrender, all of that. LDP has no longer been in a position where it has the majority of parliamentary seats and electoral support to achieve, you know, majority control all on its own. So it's had to go out and build, you know, a coalition government.
Yep.
It hasn't had to be like you've seen some of the European democracies. They've had to just form some really crazy, you know, multi-party coalitions to get, or basically to prevent what they term the far right, right, to achieve or like coming to power, right? In Japan, prior coalition before Takaichi, the junior partner with the LDP was this minor party called Komeito, which, if you look into it, what they really represent is, you know, a high degree of influence with the mainland China, you know, CCP rulership, and what they're all about is basically appeasement. Further business integrations with China, don't rock the boat. Basically, don't stand up for sovereignty or Japan's sovereignty against CCP influence is how I would describe it. So it's very tied to the hip once you start digging. Komeito representation within Japan to like a CCP friendly perspective and approach. We'll just leave it at that. With Takaichi coming to power, the junior partner was flipped, right? So it's bye-bye Komeito, hello Japan Innovation Party. And if you look into this Japan Innovation Party, with the way they describe themselves on their own website, it's like sovereignty first. Like, I forget the exact quote. I don't have, I'm not at my desk, so I didn't have the show notes here.
Lead with what they mean, though, literally.
Yeah.
Sovereignty.
They wear it right on their sleeve, right? Okay. And so if you look at the headlines that Takaichi has, you know, made for herself in the last 2 to 3 months since coming to power, it's been primarily around the notion of Japan standing up for its own interest in the case that mainland China acted upon Taiwan, right, to further encircle it, whatever, bring it into that mainland authority structure. That ticked off the Chinese. They've responded over the last several weeks with measures that would go through, like, that would coordinate through just traditional economic and financial means, namely not purchasing Japanese fish exports from its sector. This was, as I understand, like a key harvest season. Did impact Japanese fishing industry pretty significantly. They've encouraged Chinese tourists not to travel to Japan,
right.
You know, citing safety reasons. And they also engaged in what have been considered the most significant war games exercises, with like basically an encirclement or blockade of Taiwan itself.
Right.
When I say Taiwan, they would consider it China. So there's been a step up here. It's getting heated. So the response to that Sunday morning, Takaichi says, we're going to hold a snap election. And basically what she's expecting is to shore up her coalition, both LDP and Japan Innovation Parties, seats in their parliamentary body, which will give her more control, basically more political power. That's where I think we've set the stage with everything, Cameron, to go into what we saw happen at Davos.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So with the Davos piece, I'm really curious from your perspective, Matt. You've done a lot to set this all up, kind of just for me at least, and for sure for the viewers. Can you outline kind of the two factions, or the maybe more factions in your mind, and then go on and explain kind of what's going on there?
yeah, okay. So the factions in the West, there's two who are jockeying for control and are in a tug of war, and I'd say there's others who matter who are still kind of on the sidelines. But eventually, as we talked about with the Fed last week, they're pulled onto a side in the tug of war. Everybody and everything is going to have to pick, right? You can't play the man in the middle, try to play both sides. Eventually you're going to have to, like, because ultimately someone wins the tug of war, and all of the people involved in the Game of Thrones want to preserve their position, have a seat at the table in whatever uh, side emerges and gets to govern and whatever lies ahead. Everybody's eventually going to take a side once it becomes crystal clear who's going to win, or certain, maybe you do get convinced to join the losing side if you're promised something in particular, say a larger share of the spoils, something like this. Is just how political horse trading works.
Right.
All right, but the key sides involved. So I think it's pretty obvious at this point. Whoever Gavin Newsom is lined up with is totally not simpatico with everybody who Washington, D.C. sent to Davos this week. So from the Trump administration, you saw him travel with what I'd say is kind of an abnormally large contingency of representation within his cabinet itself. You had Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick, Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. There's probably others as well that I'm missing. It was a big group. My point is, I think if you're reading, tea leaves, why would you signal that? I think like this goes back to the idea that, hey, no kings. If we just kind of stand, resist this guy, we wait him out. This force of nature personality, which is Donald Trump, which I think it's getting inarguable to deny that this guy is kind of a really big personality. If no one's,
Right.
if you haven't come to that conclusion yet, right? Like there's a reason he had his own prime
Reality
time
show. Yeah.
reality show. Exactly. Like this guy has main character energy if there ever was one. Um, you go there with a large contingent to say, oh no, there's actually a very deep bench behind this. This is a fire at this point after 10, 15 years. This movement has momentum. This is a fire that's not going to be quick and easy to put out. I think that's what he was really showing with this large contingency, who all individually held up on their own. We didn't talk about like individual sound bites or key bullet points from Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick, etc. But you could almost just do this whole analysis and just focus on them and talk hours about how they stole the show by themselves
Yeah.
at Davos. All right, so you got clearly Trump, all of those figures in one power faction. Takaichi would be in support. You would also list the actual government of Taiwan itself. You would include industry representation from the tech and semiconductor standpoint with TSM. If you look into the family ties as well, like CEOs in the American semiconductor industry, Jensen Huang, et cetera, they are Taiwanese by descent.
Yeah.
They have siblings, right? The CEO of
AMD.
AMD,
Yeah.
like they're all part of the family, and it's getting very clear at this point. Those side chains, the semiconductor industry, they're part of this sovereigntist faction. I mean, it's a business; they're going to have to do what they do to self-preserve, but they're lining up on that side if you're not noticing with that TSM deal. Who would we see on the opposing side? Mark Carney, Gavin Newsom. You would line up, basically when you see Gavin Newsom go into Davos and like to tee everything up. He does this kind of snap interview where he's just frustratedly calling for whoever he can elicit some response from in speaking into the void. Um, he calls for people to stand up, stand tall, all the empty euphemisms, right, against Donald Trump and what was being pushed for in this case, the big one is Greenland, and what we haven't even gotten to that after discussing it last week. But think about who he's soliciting responses from. You could say the European institutionalists, Christine Lagarde, Ursula von der Leyen. Just go through the list there. That's kind of the group you would see. Basically, everyone whose self-interest is to preserve the legacy institutional structures. Why do they do that? Well, bless you. If they disappear, that's they no longer have a role in the new direction the West is going. So that's very loosely how I would divide them up. I want to leave it to the audience to kind of fill in the blanks and line these people up on their own without me introducing too much bias into the process. But the way I've grouped the camps, number one, call them the old school Atlanticists, call it Anglo financial interests, what have you. I think I've listed enough here where you can, fill in the blanks yourself or come to your own conclusions. And then on the other side of that, you've got the sovereigntists, right? And at this point, it's way beyond just Trump. It's a big tent. Now, on the sidelines, you've got other parties like, say, the military or the security industry, all of that. And that itself is not a monolith, but you've got parts of the military who are aligning with, the sovereigntists. And then you've got also some holdouts who may or may not choose to align with the old security infrastructure, which is largely driven by NATO leadership. So that takes us to this point right here. This headline: NATO chief Rutte shows he's a Trump whisperer with Greenland diplomacy. Like, this idea that someone's a Trump whisperer. I don't know. Sure, whatever. That's the AP's take on this, right?
Right.
Well, what happened, right? Wednesday, by middle of the day, right, on the West Coast, we get the announcement. Trump made the announcement. Basically, a framework has been agreed to on the Greenland topic between Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, former Unilever HR executive. So brings a strong wealth of military and geopolitical strategy to the table. Basically, Trump announced that at a head-to-head agreement, there's a framework in place to resolve everything we're talking about. The hot topic over the prior week that everybody was losing their minds over in the media, the Greenland question. U.S. taking like a sovereign interest in Greenland itself. We went over the why last week. I think that the key takeaway out of Davos is how quickly this folded, and I mean it's bringing back that like Jordan-esque level of dominance
Right.
over your competing faction. Everybody thought there was going to be some resistance, despite Gavin Newsom's desperate pleas. I mean, they just folded like a wet paper bag very quickly, which I think if you're looking at this, right, at the end of the day, we're not in the club, right? Cameron and I are talking about this as outsiders, right? I manage fixed income portfolios, multi-asset, et cetera. We're trying to read between the lines and analyze the data we have as it comes in, and test hypotheses and draw conclusions, based on what we see. So we don't have the inside information. As we said, it's a big tent and we're not in it. But if you're looking at this from the standpoint of, like, think about this as a poker game, and each of these sides has cards on the table, and they're betting against each other, they're checking, they're folding, etc. Some people are bluffing, some people are actually playing a good hand. That if you analyze the game that way, think about what we just saw. One side's kind of leadership just traveled to mainland China, do photo ops, go to CCP. partnering up with the supposed adversary, right? When we talk about like
Right.
the West, the US confrontation with China, what have you, like, wait a minute, I thought we're supposed to be addressing this challenge together. But it also tells you, to some degree as well, something about the cards that Xi Jinping and really the monolithic governance structure, or monoline, I would say, monostrain, um, that the mainland China political uh, system has become in the last 10 to 15 years is basically Xi has purged all internal opposition within the
There's been a lot of corruption
CCP.
investigations within his party. Yeah.
I mean, some of it may be true. There's always political corruption, but if you're trying to, remove your political opponents or competing power factions, we just, show me the man, I'll show you the crime,
Right.
as Stalin said. Um, so I think what you're seeing here as well, if you just read between the lines, Xi Jinping's cards might not be as strong as everybody is presuming, right? Let's just leave it at that for now. Now, on the other side of it, if you're looking at, obviously Gavin Newsom showing signs of frustration, someone, instructed him, or part of the planning with his team, for lack of a better word, was, hey, you're going to go to CCP, you're going to go do this, same thing, Carney, et cetera. And you're going to like present it as a big win. You could see the frustration from their side in the interviews, like going back to that Christine Lagarde segment we started out with. There's a sense of like emergency in the locker room here. And that's where you get the pivot to plan B. We're going to shore up. We're going to do the SWOT analysis as though this is some, first year MBA student exercise we're dealing with. And you just get the sense, if this is a, competition for all the prizes, one side came out of this week basically just cementing or putting the final stamp on everything that's always been done, or that's been in progress for over a year now, since this administration has come to power. And you had one side who just seemed to recognize um,
They're
the
on the
hard
losing
reality
side.
of truth.
Yep.
Yeah, which shows up once everybody gets on the court here, and the court being this ski bender in Davos.
Yeah, I've never been to Davos, but it seems I've got some friends who have been skiing out there. I'm a big skier myself, and it looks nice. So I don't doubt that everybody's having a good time out there. But at the same time, if you're one of these folks and you're out there, you're probably looking out on the slopes, thinking to yourself, I wish this had turned out a little bit differently. If you're Carney or if you're anybody within that CCP kind of faction.
Yeah. So I think after this, I mean, put this in the 1998 finals analogy. This was just game three, right? You're up 2-1. You still got to win two more games, but it's very clear which team is in the better position right now, in my read of this whole situation. But it's not over yet. Like there's key events going on. Like number one would be the midterms and the right around the corner, like very near term. And then you've also got 2028. But I think you're also like part of this recognition from the World War II era institutional leadership is the fact that this thing is not going away, and you're not just going to be able to recover this role that America, subjected itself to post 1945, where it was willing to sacrifice its own best interests for the good of the group, if you will. So largely for the benefit of foreign countries, uh, you know, not Americans. So I think Trump was actually very delicate in his language here. He said we do highly value the European people. We want Europe to be civilizationally great again. All that stuff. He just was very harsh about the direction, or his opinion of the direction that its leadership has taken, and that's where I think the big power struggle exists at this point. So goes back. I think this will, if it wasn't clear before, after everything we've seen since the GFC in 2008, and this slowly starting to unfold, I think this week represents what would widely be considered as one of several in history schisms amongst the West, which is why we put in the old Byzantine style mosaic. You've got Trump on one side, Ursula von der Leyen as basically who I came up with as your best representation of who is leading this other coalition. But at this point, it's pretty clear there is no really strong face person to represent that movement. It looked that way maybe 5-10 years ago as these characters were still holding some sense of gravitas, but like it is diminishing by the day. So the last thing I want to get across here, we said the finals are not over, right? No one's holding the trophy yet. That tug of war has not been fully won out. I think this is the point where, what do you expect moving forward? Both sides in this conflict have to think about their next steps for tomorrow, right? Or whatever the next phase is coming out of what just happened at this, I guess we just call it a coming out party at Davos. Europe needs to go out go back to the locker room, regroup, and they're going to come back with something. There will be a strategic move to try to shore up their position in this great power struggle. But it's at that point where volatility could get introduced to the system. You don't know what to expect. It could hit financial markets, debt markets. I'm seeing things today, come across our screen, our dealer chat on Bloomberg, talking about Apple, 10 or more year debt trading above 5% for the first time in a few months, trying to solicit buyers after someone dumped a large lot, let's say, of a specific QSIP. But I'd expect something like that, and you've already seen baby steps on that approach. You notice there have been a couple of Dutch pensions who said we're dumping our U.S. Treasury investments, given what we saw just take place in Denmark.
It's Denmark, yeah.
Expect that to broaden, and this could broaden into counter moves across other venues. And this, I don't know what to call it at this point. Is it a cold war? Is it a hot war? It's a little bit of everything. As this big volatile age we're living through continues to unfold.
Right.
And I say the last thing. Let's close with this thought, Cameron. So I think it's notable. This was the first year, I'm pretty sure, that Klaus Schwab wasn't. I know everybody on Twitter knows Klaus Schwab. He's just the perfect looking villain, just because of the way he dresses, the look, etc. He just looks like the villain in a Bond movie. It just is the unfortunate nature of what it is. But this was the first year that he's been kind of out of the picture from the planning, the leadership, all of that of a Davos conference. This year, it was really Larry Fink who took the organizational reins of Davos leadership. And he talked a little bit, I won't get into this, about what does Davos in the future look like? How does it stay relevant? All of that. And basically, it's what it is. It's just, as we talk about, it's a ski bender for the uber wealthy and the elite, right? So what I want to get at here, all of the programming, everything we saw to set the table to deliver the win that I would argue that the sovereigntist movement came out with here, all the way from the speeches, the sound bites, also the events themselves, right? You're always looking at conferences, right? Who announced something, right? Who got the media drop? It's the Greenland framework, and then the Board of Peace signing ceremony to basically a Trump side routing of those post-war legacy institutions, the UN, et cetera, with this Board of Peace to bring a positive resolution to the Gaza situation, I think, is the ultimate outcome. But my point is, that whole framework itself doesn't exist if the conference organizers don't allow it to happen. So if Larry Fink didn't want this to happen, the programming would have been structured such that what we saw take place did not take place. In my read of the situation, right? So I think there's something deeper there. We talked about what BlackRock represents. It is a deeper question. It's a player in the game in terms of a legacy, like Anglo-Dutch tradition financial aggregator, where everybody rolls up their fractional securities claims into one entity, largely controlling the retirement savings, pension wealth of most Western nations at this point. I think there's something deeper there to peel back. I won't get into it any further than that, because a lot of this from the outside is still sitting below several veils to figure out exactly what's going on. But my point that I'll leave with is none of this happens without WEF's, we just call it like permission in the programming for those two sides to then go out there and do what they both did. So think about them like the arena itself that the game is taking place, which is kind of an interesting train of thought to go down as we continue to watch this big story unfold in not just money, but governance, power, and finance itself in the year ahead. So I guess buckle up. As hard as it is to believe, we're only 3 weeks into 2026.
I know, it's not even end of January yet, and we've already got some pretty big geopolitical news, so yeah.
Yep. All right. I think that's good, Cameron.
Yep. I
Close it
think
out
that's a good
there.
spot to leave it for this week. Appreciate everybody as always for listening in. I know, normally our topics kind of flow one, then two, then three, but I was telling Matt before this, I really think this is all intertwined. So, we'll see how this kind of progresses over time, but I would imagine we'll have some more episodes where it's really there's just kind of intertwining set of themes that we're really just going, overall picture. And then there's going to be a lot where we just have boom, boom, boom. Here's the 3 topics for the week. So just look out for those. And as always, stay safe. Stay looking out for that volatility, because who knows when it crops up, and if you're positioned incorrectly, could hit you like a truck.
All right.
All right. Have a good week, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.